Welcome back to Podcast Recovery, everyone. We're your hosts, David O.
And Eric V.
Today we are joined by our special guest, Kenny. How are you doing today, Kenny?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing, so I'm happy to be on your podcast.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Where are you from, Kenny?
I'm from Seattle, Washington. Grew up here and live in Seattle, and got sober here, and I'm still here years later.
Awesome. When were you first introduced to recovery?
I was first introduced to recovery when I was still a really young guy, probably as early as 14, 15 years old. I was in trouble with the law and got introduced to recovery that way, and ended up coming back into recovery and getting sober when I was 28 years old.
Nice. And how long have you been clean or sober?
I've been sober 30 years, so my sobriety date is June 8th of 1989.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm 32. Eric's 32, I believe. So you've been sober pretty much our entire lives.
Yeah, that's the case. I have a daughter that's 28 that's never seen me drink, and I have a son who was adopted in my sobriety, and he's never seen me drink either. So
awesome. What a blessing. All right, man. Well, with all that out of the way, we're gonna turn it over to you to share your story with us. So take it away.
Great. Well, my name is Kenny. I'm an alcoholic. I've been in recovery for 30 years. Like we just said, I'm a huge fan of the podcast Recovery, and saw you guys, David and Eric, on Twitter. I think it's probably where I first found you guys. So I'm really grateful to be here. And I just like to start by saying that, I'm probably going to talk for 30 minutes or so, and during that time, I'll tell a little bit of my story and try to give you a little bit of a feeling for some of the passion that I have about recovery and what it's done in my life. But I got sober, as I said, on June 8th in 1989. I came from an alcoholic home. I think sometimes that's important. It seems like a lot of people in recovery came from alcoholic homes or came from homes where there was divorce or other problems, anger problems or violence in the family. But it certainly isn't that way for everybody. I know that to be the case because my brother Jeff is not an alcoholic, and he and I shared a bedroom when we were growing up. But I grew up in a home where my mother was an alcoholic, and she's sober now, and my stepfather, who raised me and who I grew up with, is the man in my life, died on the streets of Seattle, homeless as an alcoholic. And so I knew from the time I was young that, that alcoholism was not anything I wasn't aware of. I just was aware of how unusual it was for the type of drinking and drugs that were going on in my own family. Mm-hmm. And one of the, for instance, is when I was a young kid, we moved a lot because of that. And I went to a new junior high school. It was 7th grade, which was a really, pretty intensely social kind of time in a person's life. And so the 7th grade was kind of my move from grammar school into junior high school. And I took that move, and I was 12 years old. I was just about to turn 13, and I was still wet in the bed. I was still, because my house was the party house, and everybody from the bar came to my house after the bars closed, and there was a lot of insanity and fights. The police were, we were well known, my family, by the Seattle Police Department, which made regular visits, and so I would just wake up and have to get myself ready for school. I didn't know anything about personal hygiene or those kinds of things, and I would just try to towel dry myself off the best I could and try to dig through a pile of dirty clothes trying to find the cleanest of the dirty clothes. and put that on, and they were clothes that didn't really fit that well. And so, that's the condition I was going to school in. I had long hair was popular then, and so I had really long, greasy hair, and the greasy part wasn't popular, but I stunk like urine, and one of the fun things I say is that if you were to talk about the drug of choice, which is not my favorite thing, my favorite term, I really believe that the drugs that got me into trouble were the drugs of no choice, which for me were alcohol, heroin, cocaine, and some others. But those were the drugs I didn't have any choice over. No matter how bad I wanted to stop, I couldn't. And if you were to use that term, a drug of choice, my first drug of choice was probably lack of oxygen to the brain. And so I was looking for a way out. I would choke myself, and then I'd get this euphoria for a few minutes, and I would kind of stagger around. So, the funny thing that I say is that, my popularity waned a little bit in the 7th grade because I was this, stinky kid that smelled like urine, that would stagger around, and it was just when alcohol came my way and I really made the decision to start drinking, I was off to the races. And I've only ever met one other person. There was years I would tell my story, and I would one of the things that I would say is that I never knew another person that had this as a part of their story, and that was that as a juvenile, I was probably about 15 or 16. I was court-ordered to Antabuse because I was always drunk at school. I was drunk every time I was arrested. I went to, and so I would every day go to the pharmacist that was close to the house where I was living, and the pharmacist would give me a pill, and I would take it, and I'd have to open my mouth and show him that I'd swallowed the pill, and I would sign a paper, and he would sign it, and off I would go. But I spent most of my juvenile years in and out of institutions of one kind or another, foster homes and group homes and lockup institutions. And I was in my first treatment center, if you could call it that, when I was about 16 years old. It was a lockdown facility, and locked down in cells, and but it was the whole unit. The particular unit in this facility was a unit for juvenile drug offenders, and and I was there for a year, and I left, and none of that ever. I just even during the times when I couldn't drink or drug, I was just obsessed with the idea of drinking and drugging. And I had some small modicums of success. For a period of time, I had a grandfather that was in the fishing business in Alaska. He worked for a family that owned some boats, and he thought, well, we'll put him on a boat up to Alaska, and that'll straighten him out, And so I fished for quite a few years, which was really kind of a joke, but it actually worked. I got on these boats, and I just loved the guys I was working with. I loved their enthusiasm. They were older guys. I'd never been around people like that. They took an interest in me. They mentored me. And there was, a time where I just loved it, and I really excelled, even though at that time, and I can say with this caveat that once I was in sobriety, I've had a really great career in the seafood and fishing business, and done really well, provided for my family, and I'm so grateful for that. And it's much, much better now than it was, but in those days it was just completely the wild, wild west. There was no drug testing. There was no Coast Guard, hardly zero Coast Guard enforcement for drugs and alcohol. They just looked the other way like, hey, these are guys who are just having some fun. But we wouldn't just work hard. We would work hard. We weren't just work hard, play hard guys. We would work hard while, we were playing hard while we were working. So we were doing a lot of drugs and drinking while we were working and doing this really dangerous work. And we were just completely out of control. And even in that group, there was an urgency about my drinking. There was this manner of drinking and using where once I started, I lost all control over amounts, and I could not stop. And so even among these other people, these guys, passed a basket and put me through treatment twice, this family, and tried to help me. And the last time I went to them was one day out of my second time these guys had put me through treatment, and I was asking for money on the next trip, and I was loaded already. And so they just said, "Hey, Kenny, until you get your act together, man, do not come around, and, we're done with you." And for the next 3 years, there's this, idea that, I knew then even that if I took a drink, I was, it was curtains. I knew I had to stop. I knew for a fact that it wasn't, I knew for a fact that I needed to reach out for help. I knew I couldn't do it on my own, all of those things. And then I drank another 3 years. And I ended up behind a McDonald's restaurant here in Seattle. And there was a restaurant and a little building with a bar next to it called the Baranoff. And between the McDonald's and the Baranoff, they were two separate buildings, but there was a facade across the front of them. So it looked like one building from the front when you walked down the street. But if you went in behind, you could get between those two buildings, go through some bushes and get between those two buildings. And I set myself up a little cardboard lean-to there. And while I was, I can't even say I was living there because I'd totally quit sleeping and I quit eating. And, I was just that guy that was living only to drink. That was it. And do drugs. And I'd been doing IV drugs for many years up to that point, even back in the days when I was on the boats. I would hide that from the other guys on the boats, but that's one of the things that I would do in this crazy attempt to try to overcome this obsession for more. And that's really what it amounted to for me, was just this, I always, I would just get into this place where I just thought if I had the right combination and the right amount of things in me at the right time, and I could get just everything perfect, that if I could get to that place, I was going to be able to take a deep breath. And from that place, I was convinced I would be able to stop. Like, if I can just get there, then I'm going to call for help and I'm going to be able to stop. And, a day turned into a week, and a week turned into a month, and a month turned into a year, and a year turned into 3 years of just, I no longer was doing drugs for any kind of escape or for any kind of real euphoria. I wasn't doing it to try to fit in. I wasn't doing it to try to make friends or to, get girls to talk to me or go to shows or listen to music or any of that stuff. All that partying stuff was completely gone. And the only reason I was continuing was because of this obsession I had for more. That was it. That was the only thing that I had left in the end. And somehow I made it out from behind that McDonald's. In that same parking lot, there was a sobriety fellowship that was meeting, and I knew that they had meetings there, and I had a friend that I knew from childhood that was going there, and he was staying sober. And I thought, well, maybe if I go over there, I was out of money, and I was at a place where I would get really, really sick when I stopped, and I was out of money. Yeah. And so I just thought, and it's like one of those miracles. I think we get sober sometimes on days when we don't expect to get sober, when we're not trying to get sober. And I thought and when we don't want to get sober, I thought even if I did want to get sober, which I don't, because it always had meant the same thing for me, just one more attempt and one more failure, that even if I did want to, I wouldn't be able to. And it would just be just this kind of lost cause, and why even try? But I did think that if I went there, I might meet somebody that would take me into their house and nurse me through some withdrawals so I could try to find and get some gain back, because, I just woke up every day, or came to every day with the idea that what kind of pack of lies am I going to come up with today to try to get me out of this mess? And so, that was the beginning of my sobriety. That was June 8th of 1989. And I had a guy come up to me, something happened to me. I went to this fellowship hall, and I just started, the meeting ended, and I didn't know what I was going to do. My friend wasn't there, and I just started crying in this meeting. And it was just like that hollow cry, just, there was like no emotions attached to it. It just felt like an empty shell inside, which is like so different than I feel today. I just feel like full of life, and just, love doing this kind of thing, and love helping other people. And I sponsor, I've had a chance to see a lot of other people make their beds and walk again. And I've been very active in that. But I just, that meeting ended, and I was there just, totally lost. And, my family had tried to help me. My friends had tried to help me. Everybody tried to help me. And a complete stranger came up and said, listen, if you'd be willing to go to detox, we'd be happy to give you a ride. And as a matter of fact, we've already made a couple calls, and they got a bed waiting for you. And, I've just been such a recipient of kindness in recovery, and people, for no other reason than just this, feeling of well-being and their own efforts to get sober. They were reaching their hand out to people who were still suffering and trying to stay sober themselves. And, I just feel so lucky I got sober, not just only when I got sober, with the guys that I got sober with, and the people that were around me. That's really what it took. And I'm not a believer that anybody gets well in isolation, regardless of what particular program you go into, regardless of your belief or lack of belief. It's that is one of the keys to recovery, is that, we don't do this thing alone.
Yeah.
And, I like to say I learned about getting from experts. I got the same guy, Al, that dropped me off at detox. He picked me up, and after 5 days in the detox, he picked me up, and that's where I got my first 5 days of sobriety. Nice. And, looking back on it, it's overwhelming for me too, even to think about like 30 years of sobriety. That's like, that's, more than half my life. I'm 58 years old now, and it's just, such an incredible thing to me. And I'm just so grateful that, that's what happened, because, I'm absolutely convinced that I should have died behind that McDonald's restaurant. I was just completely out of my mind back there. I was close enough. My little camp out hiding spot was close enough to where I could still hear the loudspeaker from the people using the drive-through, and they would say, I need a number 3 supersize with a Diet Coke. And I thought I heard them saying, hey, there's a freak back there shooting Coke. Somebody called the FBI. That was the kind of what was going on in my head. And, even after I got sober, I can say that, one of my favorite things is I was not too well at the time talking about being sober, being a year and a half or 2 years sober. It took a long time for me to come out of that. I can remember sitting down, my Al, who picked me up, he was kind of my sponsor in sobriety, and he owned a little car lot, and I stayed in the back of the car lot. He had a little, there was a bedroom back there and a little kitchen, it was very comfortable, and it was, but it was in a part of Seattle right on Highway 99 and 82nd, right in town, and it's just, it's not a very good neighborhood now. It was I think it was probably a worse neighborhood then. But it's still not a very nice area, not a place you'd want to go at night, and unless you were like I was back then. It's just, I just look back and I just think, man, how did that possibly happen? Because I got sober, and then not only did I get sober, but I stayed sober, and I stayed sober right in the thick of everything. Every morning I'd walk out, there were syringes in the alley, right coming out the back door, which was where my main entrance out of the little bedroom and stuff in the back. There was always stuff going on in the car lot at night, and I knew a lot of the people from that area. And I just think, man, what a miracle it was that happened. And I got very, very vested in pursuing a spiritual way of life. And I really, to this day, I look back on it, and I think that's what made the difference for me was that I started pursuing a spiritual way of life. And, I went and did some of the things that were suggested. I wrote an inventory and, of all the people I'd had these resentments against. And I looked at, where was I to blame? Where was I at fault? What should I have done? I went, I did the fifth step where we go and sit down with another human being and go through our life story from this place of here's all these resentments I had. And, all of this stuff, I just found that I'd been wrong about everything in my entire life. That, I was wrong about my mother. I was wrong about my father. I was wrong about my brother and sister. I was wrong about my 7th grade gym teacher. I was wrong about the Seattle Police Department. I was wrong about the Republicans. I was wrong about the Democrats. Just everything in the list. And, it was like the dominoes just kind of started falling, and all of these core beliefs that I had just started falling apart. And I really think, that's the beginning for so many of us, is whether you want to call that, a complete psychic change, which is like the idea that in our minds, the psychic is like the way we think, like my way of thinking completely changed, or you want to call it a spiritual experience, or you want to call it kind of a moral psychological event. Doesn't matter, but that's, this is what I attribute to pursuing the spiritual life. And, there's really a great psychiatrist, a guy named Carl Jung, that was around back in the 1930s, 20s, and 30s. And, he's still the kind of like one of the fathers of modern psychology. Most counselors and psychologists would tell you they're Jungists. That's what they teach in psychology today. And so he was really a profound guy. He wasn't an alcoholic or a drug addict, but he was incredibly interested just because he was a guy that really looked at these archetypes. And one of the archetypes that he was really interested in was this alcoholic, this hopeless variety alcoholic and drug. And what he said was, he called it spiritus contra spiritum, which meant that we're drinking the spirits, and it's a proxy for the spiritual experience. that he thought at the core of every case of alcoholism and drug addiction, at its foundation, at its very beginning, was this yearning for the divine. That the alcoholics and drug addicts are people that have this inner, this inner dwelling place that's not complete unless we find the spiritual life. And without finding that, the time and day will come and I will drink and or drug again. That was kind of one of his beliefs, and I'm really a subscriber to that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an analogy that I'll use here, and the analogy is just like, one of the things that there's a lot of, I think part of the spiritual life is like our intuition returns. We get this intuitive thought, these inspirations. Some people call it this vital sixth sense, that we get this sense that's beyond our hearing and our taste and our touch and our eyesight and the five main senses. That there's a sixth sense beyond that. People say it's like the mother's intuition, they call it, or the women's intuition, where the kid comes into the house and the mom says, "What's wrong?" She can just sense, something's wrong, and that that's this innate part of us that gets to be awoken, and that we are people that the best description I have is that I was walking around asleep, dreaming that I was awake.
Mm-hmm.
That is where I was, and now I'm awake. As a result of doing some super simple spiritual things and being willing to grow on a regular basis that experience in my life, I found that I'm easily able now to stay sober. It's not even I don't get up in the morning and pray, "God, please help to keep me sober," because I open my just there. This gift is just there. I think about a lot of other things, but that's not one of them. And the analogy that I'll use on kind of this inspiration, and then I'll wrap it up with this because I think we're just over. We're coming up pretty quick on the
You're good.
minute. I'm really anxious to get questions and answers, but the piece that I think about is, that, kind of where my imagination has been fired in this deal is that when I was homeless a little for just a short time before I got sober. I usually had money to, I could drum up money to get a hotel room with some different people, or, I had some game left up until the end, which I had no game, but, I had to get a girl to let me crash at their place for a while, or some friend, or, but when I was a kid, I was homeless quite a few times as a teenager, and I was homeless just because it was better to walk the streets all night than it was to go home on certain nights where I had a bed and a room, and because of what was going on there. But the thing that, there was a friend of mine, and he had a garage, and I used to go there, and his parents, he was a young kid, but his parents let him hang out in the garage, and he'd set up a bedroom and everything out there for himself. And it was separate. The garage was separate from the house. I don't know what was going on with the parents at the time. I thought it was the coolest place in the world. Now I think, my God, what was going on with those parents? But but the thing that I remember was it was just a cool place. He had music and huge speakers, and girls would come over. He always had booze, and we were always drinking. There was always pot. And, it was just wonderful. He had a really mean dog that would attack people. It was just like, I just thought this was the coolest thing in the world, And I used to walk around when I was homeless, and I would see these clearly underutilized garages. And I would think to myself, man, if I could ever have a garage, all to my own, life would be wonderful. That would be so great. And it wasn't even to be my garage. It was always if somebody else would let me stay in their garage. That was like the best I could hope for in my life. And, through staying sober and continuously being on a spiritual path and seeking deeper and deeper spiritual experiences, my imagination was fired. And once we lose this obsession to destroy ourselves with booze and drugs, all kinds of remarkable things can happen in our life that, once that is removed, I found out, well, geez, I'm pretty good at business. And I didn't want to go fishing on the boats anymore. So I just started, trying to help where I could, and ended up in management. And then I ended up as a general manager of a company. And I moved to another company where I was president and CEO of a company. And we had 300 people working for us.
Wow.
And, it was, and I thought about that at some time years ago. I thought, man, I was always looking for that garage, but I never saw the house. I never saw, and it's like, that's become like this analogy for me is this metaphor. I never saw the house. I never saw the family or the family dog or the kids. I never saw the yard, nothing. It was right there in front of me. But I was so focused on the garage that I couldn't even see the rest of this. So, I ask myself all the time, like, well, what is the garage today? Maybe all this that I've got now is just the garage. And, I live in a very, very nice area of Seattle. I've got a beautiful view of the water. I mean, I've been married for 23 years. I have a daughter that we raised together when we got married. She came to live with us. My daughter's 28 years old now, and she's never seen me take a drink. And we adopted a young boy and brought him into our family, and he's 32 now, has never seen me take a drink. And I've had this great career, and now I'm just, working at home as a consultant, and I got more work than I want, and some days, and so it's just, it's a beautiful life, man. I've got, been able to help my kids along the way, and I've, since they very first told me when I was less than 1 year sober, I got this message that if you want to keep what you found, you got to give it away. And I've had that experience of just getting a shiver up my spine a few times in early sobriety, just thinking, whoa, man, it's good to be alive.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to lose that. And so, from that day to this, I've never not been working with some new alcoholics. There's constantly a flow of people here at my house, and with what's going on today, with the virus, we're doing stuff by phone, but I've always had new guys in my life and continued to carry the message. So that's over my 30 minutes, but man, you guys, I'm telling you, David and Eric, you guys got something really special going, and I'm glad I could come and offer my support.
Oh man, dude, that was such an amazing share, man. Like every time I would write down a question, like a couple of minutes later, you would answer the question. I was like, damn. So I had to keep like scribbling, trying to catch up with just like such a well-rounded and just well-versed story of recovery, man. Would you like to ask the first question, Eric, or would you like me to?
Go ahead, David.
Okay. You talked about in your story sort of like a lot of us get clean or we get sober on days that we don't even mean to. And I'm of the belief that I don't think there is a wrong reason or a bad reason to get clean or sober. So I want to know your take on that. Do you believe there can be is there no wrong reason to get clean or sober?
Yeah, I think so. That was Eric that asked the question, right?
David,
yeah, okay. I have trouble telling your voice apart, but yeah, David, I think that has to be right. I mean, it's probably not wise to get sober in order to see if you can get your wife back or get your job back or those kind of things. I think that's why people say those kind of things. It's well-meaning, but I think you're right. It can be misguiding it sometimes. That whatever reason there is for you to get sober, so long as you find this willingness to be open-minded and to begin, to pursue, in my thoughts, it helps to pursue the spiritual life and to find somebody else that's been down that path that can take you through some of these steps. That's, I think there's probably a lot of people that came in with wrong motives and so I think, whatever gets you sober. So I would agree with you. I think you're entirely right, David. There is no wrong reason to get sober.
Yeah, exactly. Like I got clean and sober coming out of jail, and like honestly, my big mindset at that point in time was I don't want to go back to jail. It wasn't I want to stay clean and sober for the rest of my life, but it grew and it developed out of I don't want to go back to jail. Like I don't want to live in and out of jail for the rest of my life. And now 8 years later, like I'm still here with a beautiful, growing, evolving recovery.
Yeah, there you go.
What you got, Eric?
So it sounds like from, where you are now, you have a fairly full life between work and family and recovery. And one of the things that I like to focus on is trying to the best of my ability, obtain balance. So how are you able to manage each aspect of your life without letting one of those aspects start to kind of take the wheel and lose focus of other responsibilities that are going on in your day-to-day life?
Well, Eric, that's such a good question. It's a real common question that people have, and I asked a real wise man one time that same question, and he said, well, trying to find balance in your life sounds to me like, I'm powerless over my addiction, and here's how I'm going to manage my life. And so I think we have to be a little careful with this. I think, for me, I do a lot of prayer. I do a lot of meditation. So I consider my plans for the day. At the end of the day, I do a nightly review where I look back on my day and think about things like, was I kind and loving to all? Do I owe anybody an apology? Those kinds of things. And I think when we're doing that, this balance really comes organically. That and I don't want to sound like I don't understand the question somehow, or that I haven't done that myself, because I've had periods in my sobriety where I was working until 10 o'clock at night, and it did take a toll on my relationships, or the time that I could have spent with my kids, or times when I just thought I was having a big heart, but what really was happening was I was just taking on way too many responsibilities with new people and with commitments in sober groups and that kind of thing. That took a deal. But I find that when I'm really focused and kind of letting the Spirit guide me rather than trying to guide myself, that's not a question. The things that I need to do, I find the time to do, and time's available. And also, you know, we live in this delusion sometimes, like the night before, we'll be thinking, oh my God, I got this huge day tomorrow. How am I ever going to get through it? And then we get up and we start working and we get through the day and we figure out, oh, that really wasn't too bad. I kind of got everything done I needed to get done. And, you know, it wasn't, you know, I was kind of worried for nothing. And we're just great at that. We'll fall for that same trick over and over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
So that's how I try to look at it. I try to look at it as, you know, when I'm doing the right things and I'm pursuing a spiritual life and I'm being thoughtful about what my next step is going to be throughout my day, I don't need to worry too much about balance.
Nice.
Perfect. All right, Eric, I have 2 questions that I want to ask back to back. Is that okay?
Sure, David. Sure.
Thank you. And thanks, buddy. We're working together. We're working together on this one. All right.
Yeah. Well, it was good to get a question from Eric. That was good. I'd read a little thing on your internet site about Eric, and I saw that, you know, he had the heroin and crack and stuff. I thought, oh, this interview is going to go perfect. I got nothing to worry about. I'm with my like-minded people here.
Oh yeah. You're right in our wheelhouse. All right. Okay. So, like you talked a lot about really kind of addict thinking and addict behavior, just sort of, and a lot of those misconceptions or misinterpretations that we like find in recovery that we had in our earlier life while we were in active addiction. So how do you think our misperception of our lives, how does that help accelerate our addiction?
Well, I think it's really simple. David, that, you know, when we are, you know, we're people who tend to be, and I think, you know, most psychiatrists and doctors and professionals that study this problem of addiction, and they would agree with this, is that, you know, we are people who are selfish and self-centered to the extreme. And It's like, you know, the metaphor that I have for that, it's like a 360-degree mirror. It's this wraparound mirror, which means no matter what direction I turn and look at whatever problems I have in my life, it's always, how does this affect me? How is this? And so, so long as we have that viewpoint of ourselves, this, you know, and some people say, you know, I'm not much, but I'm all I think about, you know, or that we're, you know, egomaniacs with inferiority complexes, because, you know, I think both things are true. We do seem to have this really negative self-talk when we come in, and even well into our sobriety, we'll just, you know, we'll have this craziness, and we'll just be sitting around thinking, you know, I'm never going to amount to anything. This isn't going to work out. Why am I doing this? Oh, my wife's going to walk out the door any minute, and or I'm going to lose my job, or my money's going to disappear. All this craziness that's just a waste of time thinking about that stuff. But so, you know, I hope that kind of gives you a little flavor for the way I think about that. But
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And the second part to that question is, how do we change that, like, that status quo of our mindset? How do we change those really self-deprecating thoughts and emotions that we have about ourselves in recovery, and how do we really grow from there?
Yeah, that's kind of a deeper question, and, you know, I don't want to get too deep with the answer, but I'll tell you this, you know, that I have this belief that, you know, nobody else can say that I am for you. And what I mean by that is that it's that, you know, we kind of know that as a foundation of people that have had any experience with 12-step recovery programs, that, one of the things, that I am Kenny and I am an alcoholic, and, all the things that really means. Like, it doesn't do any good for some guy in a treatment intake to tell you, yeah, you're a low stage chronic alcoholic. That doesn't have the same effect as saying the I am. And so we need to take that a step further and be able to say that, my name is Kenny and I am a loving child of God. My name is Kenny and I am a worthwhile human being that cares about other people. And, that needs to become kind of this new set. And only through, turning my will and my life over to God and writing an inventory and doing a fifth step, which is kind of admitting all of your faults, your shortcomings, your defects of character, and doing that with another human being, where I really kind of get hammered with this, and I see that, oh my God, the only thing I've ever done is worried about myself. I thought it was my boss, but really I was stealing from the company. I was a terrible employee, but in my mind, I'm thinking, oh man, I'm the hardest worker here, and I'm not getting treated right. It's just all of these things that we believe. And I can tell you, I think, sometimes we got to get used to the fact that we're not just going to get well on a week from Thursday. We're going to be in this process for a while. And that it takes this kind of prayer and meditation and this awareness of the I am. Nobody else can say that for you. It's got to come from, one, getting rid of all of these old beliefs, and two, having some new set of concepts and beliefs start to be the driving forces in our lives.
Nice. Like it.
All right. So you were talking a little bit about spirituality throughout your share. And one of the things that I've been, it's a little bit of a taboo question, but I've been trying to ask it to a few people because I think it is an important thing to discuss with people in recovery.
Absolutely.
Is kind of understanding, what is your spirituality? What do you consider your spirituality? Because not everyone subscribes to spirituality as a means to recovery. And I believe that definition evolves for everyone and it changes to meet the needs of the individual. So what does your spirituality mean? And what does it mean? Like, what does it mean to you, and how do you quantify that?
Well, I think for me, and it's a question I'm honestly, when I'm working with people, I'm reluctant to ask that but I'll give you, it's a legitimate question. I want to give you a good answer, and the answer for me personally is that I don't consider myself a religious person, although I believe in kind of the one religious philosophy that we're all headed. If we all are taking a different path up the mountain, we're all going to get to the summit, So, but it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of boats going to the destinations. Just like pick a boat, get in it, and go. We're all going to arrive there. So that's for me. But the really important thing in this idea of coming to believe, which is a part of so many of the 12-step programs, that this idea of coming to believe is, that we have to have some conception of a power greater than ourselves. I think that's true to really be one of the driving forces that propels us through the 12th step. And it's one of those things, I think it's the crown jewel of the anonymous group's way of life, and it started with Alcoholics Anonymous. That was the first book that was ever published, back in the late 30s on the first time the 12 steps were ever published. And now it's been adopted by, all kinds of programs. And I'm acutely aware there's other things too that are not 12-step movements, and I'm totally supportive of whatever works. So I can only speak from my own experience, but it's clear in there that one of the things we want to do is to build our own conception of God. So, you can just look at some of these terms that are the word God. It says, one of the ideas that I think is this crown jewel is any time, therefore, we speak to you of God, we're always talking about your conception of God. So even though the word God comes from my mouth, it always means what it means to you. So that's kind of like, that's why I say I'm reluctant to answer that question sometimes, because it doesn't matter. You can't have a spiritual experience based on what my beliefs are. You got to come to some idea. Some people come up with simple things like just good, orderly direction, or they use a group of drunks, or they use a group meetings, or this collective, the collective mind of a group of people that's trying to help them, that they can rely on. And for other people, maybe they go on and they say, geez, I was raised a Catholic and I'm going to go back to the church of my childhood, and that's where they find their spirituality. But the important thing is just to start somewhere, and it doesn't matter how inadequate a conception we have in the beginning. It's a place to start, and once you find that place, you can't fail on this path.
Nice. Do you want to ask another? I got two in a row, Eric.
You can do your two, and then I'll do one. Go ahead, David.
Wait, no. Well, I had really. Oh, I did too. I'm just trying to keep the balance, buddy.
Oh no, you can go, and then I'll do.
You guys are
all right. Okay. All right. All right. Am I right in the assumption that you're an AA guy, Kenny?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. We can always tell from the language. No, I'm just kidding. Well, Eric and I are both.
That's probably true. I think that's probably true. It's not hard to tell.
Yeah, there's just there's like little just phrases from either fellowship that usually a dead tip off. And after doing this, we can you guys. No, I'm kidding. So Eric and I are predominantly NA guys. So
yeah.
And I've always kind of seen or felt in our area that there's somewhat of a sibling rivalry between the two main 12-step fellowships. And I think, and I believe I can speak for Eric on this, we at Podcast Recovery, we believe in a connectivity between all the fellowships. So how can NA and AA really come together and be more connective between the two and more harmonious towards just a greater recovery for everybody?
Yeah, I think it's happening now. I mean, I really think that the more people begin to have an understanding that what really was started with the 12-step movement in the 30s is really a movement of anonymous groups, whether it's CA or NA or Gamblers Anonymous or sex addicts or it's really this huge movement of millions of people in these anonymous groups. And that's why people, there's some people that have said, and this was out of a Time magazine article some years ago, but they said that, it was kind of the turn of the century and they were, we were coming into the 21st century. And, but they said that, it's that this anonymous group's way of life was likely one of the single biggest movements of the 20th century. So it's a huge deal, but it encompasses everybody. I think, there's some old timers probably in both programs that are holding a tight line and And if those people either get a little more used to the fact that people are going to show up at meetings and say things that might be some of these tip-off words that you talk about from the other program and not bother them, or they're going to talk about drugs, and, that's going to be a more accepted, open thing. That's my hope, because, at its core, I think, we're really, especially where we're talking about addiction and alcoholism, substance abuse, I should say, and alcoholism.
Yeah.
The programs, and we see that in my area quite a bit, where we've got a lot of folks in my area that do both NA and AA and CA, and they'll go to MA meetings, and they don't differentiate too much between the fellowships. They really try to broaden, and I think that movement's already begun, and I think we're going to continue to see more and more of that. And personally, I don't think we've got anything to fear of that happening. I think it's going to only add to the program, not take away from anything.
Absolutely. Yep. What you got, Eric?
So I'll go with one of our questions that we usually ask. So throughout your recovery, as the drugs and the alcohol, you put those down, other addictions or addictive tendencies or behaviors are going to manifest themselves in your life. So I'm curious, which addictive tendencies have you noticed, or behaviors have you noticed that have presented themselves throughout your recovery? And how have you used recovery to then deter that behavior and to, kind of put a lid on it, if you will? So I kind of want to hear how you've, not only what addictive tendencies you've realized have manifested, but also how did you go about dealing with them?
Yeah, of course, there's the stuff that comes to mind are the things that I don't want to talk about. So that's probably the things that I should probably try to offer to the listeners, that would be the most help. So, but, I had a real issue with sex and pornography, and early in sobriety. It just kind of took over, and it was really tough. It was embarrassing because I was working with guys and I was kind of well thought of around the fellowships that I was going to. And, there was a real stigma that I thought I had attached to it in my mind. But I had to seek some help for it. And I asked a few people around the program for some help. And I can tell you, some of the fellowships are great places to go for your problems with addiction and substance abuse, but it might not be the best place to go for a problem with sex. And so, I, on my own, just got to a place where I could see that if it continued, it was going to eventually, it could lead to right back to using drugs again. And I sought out some counseling, and I went and saw a therapist, and it was great because this lady knew nothing about the 12 steps at all, had no, so it was good. I found somebody that wasn't going to just, because I told her, I'm in the program, I'm doing this, and I'm helping all these people and doing this and that. And she was like, well, that's all good, but that's not what we're here to talk about, so it was great. I got somebody that could focus on. She just said to me, she said, listen, I'll work with you, but you got to commit to 2 years because it's going to take about 2 years. You got some wires crossed here, and it's going to take a couple years to help uncross some of these wires. And we had to go back and look at things like, that this was a way that I nurtured myself as a young kid, just that was one of the only things I could find that brought any kind of a good feeling to me in some of the situations. So, I always kind of related that with nurturing myself and just these kind of wires that I just had completely backwards, and I spent 2 years, and I sent a lot of other people that I've met in the program that had these kind of problems. I sent them, said, here's a lady that'll help you out. And for years, I don't know if she's still around or not, but for years, I know that I'm guessing probably about 25% of her clientele were people that I was sending her way. But it's helpful. So I should say that first. If you have one of these things, you may find that you need to seek some outside help, and outside help is always good anyway. I've just seen too many people use therapy and other professionals. That we just don't belittle a good doctor or psychiatrist. We just don't. Yep. And then some of the other things I think are like workaholism, and that's something that I've had to deal with. And it's hard because it was one of those things that actually served me well in some respects. It gave me some of these status things, and people would say, "Oh, he's doing really good." But the fact was is that I would have. I got to a point where I was afraid I was going to die of a heart attack at my desk one day. So those kind of things, and but I hope that's helpful. Hope that's a good answer.
No, yeah,
oh yeah, those were perfect.
I mean,
go ahead, Eric.
No, definitely. I can relate to the workaholism, and also, I mean, even the porn addiction. I think that's something that's not talked about enough. Because I feel like it's a taboo issue, but I've definitely struggled with that like in the past, and I know a lot of other people who have as well, and it's something that I think because of the connotation that it holds, it's almost shameful. Well, it's not almost. It feels shameful to talk about it, but through this process of doing the podcast and talking to different people, there really isn't anything wrong with talking about it and trying to become better with it. And the more people we can help to overcome issues, that's really what matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Eric, you
nailed it. That's exactly
hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I was going to say. Like it needs to get talked about more. And I just wanted to say thank you for being honest about that shit. It's difficult. A lot of people don't because, like Eric said, they feel that shame. So I just want to say thank you for touching on that subject. All right, I got one more question for you.
All right.
So I'm asking this question for both Eric and I, us being the youngins in recovery, the new generation of recovery, and you're the sage predecessor. What advice can you give to us young guys in recovery to stay motivated and avoid complacency or just getting into a rut in recovery and staying motivated and grateful for long-term recovery? What advice can you give us?
Yeah, that's a pretty easy one because there's one thing that kind of is paramount and always floats to the surface. It's always at the top, and that is the idea of one addict working with another. Mm-hmm. That's the deal. That is the one thing that I think trips people up. And there's a lot of, there's that, people kind of stop working with other people. They start and they get excited about it. And maybe they're working with a guy or two, or they're down at the mission trying to help, whatever it is. But that's, I think, the paramount thing that people have found in recovery that is the most helpful. And then I'll just add one thing to that, and that's that when people with a certain amount of time who seem to have a good program, maybe they've got some time under their belt, time like you guys got or more, and I've seen it with guys with 20 and 30 years, they go back out and you wonder, God, how could that be possible? He was so tuned in, or she was just a dynamo in the meeting, and she was always, it seemed like she was doing everything right, and then just next thing you know, she's nowhere to be found, and, we hear the story that she died or that she's, a total mess, and she's lost her marriage and her job, and and those kind of things. I've had a chance to work over the years. I had a chance to work with people like that, and when they come back, and they're fortunate enough to come back, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to sit down and say what happened. It's always the same thing. Always, it's been the same thing, and it's that there was something going on in their life that they weren't being accountable to anybody for. There was some secret, like the stuff we just talked about. They were stealing from work. They'd run up their credit card debt, and they weren't telling anybody how much trouble they were in. They had, they were cheating on their husband or their wife or their boyfriend. They were, they had addiction to sex stuff. They were out gambling at night, and they weren't telling anybody about it. It was like, and that's this mask that we wear, the persona. I go into a meeting, and I'm a person who's not really honest. I just have this persona that I'm portraying as a member in good standing, and I'm not talking to anybody about these things. And so, with the guys that I've worked with over the years, we get together often, and we talk about these things. We talk just about that. It's not an A meeting or an NA meeting or anything else. We sit down, we have dinner, and then when we're done with dinner, we have a little private room. We get to have people come service our dinner and in a restaurant, and then we close the doors, and we get down to brass tacks about, okay, what is it that you need to be accountable for? What is it that's going on in your life that you're not telling anybody? And in that group, we also have another rule that nothing we talk about in that meeting is ever repeated outside of the meeting, even amongst ourselves. So once we're done with the meeting, at the end of the meeting, nobody would say, hey, what did you think about what Eric said? Or, hey, how about what David said? What did you think of that? We don't talk about it at all. Other than, like sometimes with people, hey, there's that thing I talked about. Can we talk about it together? And of course, that's fine. But so that's it. That's some advice that I'd give you guys is, work with others. Keep doing what you're doing here, because man, I'm telling you, that you guys are taking technology and putting it to some really amazingly good use, and I think you're going to find that things are really going to take off with your recovery podcast. I think it's a great thing, and I know there's more coming from looking at your website, so I'm anxious to continue to follow you guys, and I think there's some good stuff happening. So keep doing that too.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, Eric.
All right, David, it's that time.
Is it that time?
Yeah, it's that time. Go ahead.
To the Twitter question. What do we have tonight, Eric?
All right, so this is from April Ludgate, or at OK_all-right. And
from April Ludgate? Awesome.
So this is a question for all of us. So Kenny, you'll answer first, and then David, and then myself. And the question is, advice for non-family loved ones of addicts, such as close friends, on how to be supportive, things you can do to encourage them, and what to say and not to say.
Ooh, that's a good one.
So I'm assuming April's question is asking about what we can do, as people in recovery for the family members. Is that the way you guys are looking at this question?
So I think she's asking it more from I'm guessing she is a close friend of someone who's an addict, and what advice you can give to her to help her friend who is struggling with addiction.
Okay.
Yeah. What advice she can give her friend who's struggling with addiction?
Yeah, and she's not an addict.
He's not. Okay, I got it. Well, I'm glad I clarified that because I had that exactly backwards. So, um, I think, if she's willing, that there's sometimes, unfortunately, and it's one of the hardest things to do because, of course, we love these people, is we have to wait for this, what I would call this lucid interval, which is if somebody is an addict and they're the type of addict and alcoholic that we are, the time is going to come. They're either going to lose a job or the husband's going to leave or there's going to be some big upset in the family, or worse, they get arrested, they're in the hospital, they overdose. But those are the times, and sometimes we have to wait for those before we can be a maximum benefit. And we can move in when those things happen because, there's this idea the more hopeless, the better. So when we catch them when they're in that hopeless state, there's a much better chance they're going to listen to us. And we can give them information on how to get in touch with NA, how to get in touch with other programs, how to get in touch with, how do you turn them on to the Sober podcast so they can listen to a few stories of recovery. Those kinds of things are going to be incredibly helpful. And you can present some of that stuff now in advance, but if it's rejected, we don't push.
Yeah.
This idea that the door to the soul opens inward. In other words, people got to stop. If you push a door that opens inward, if you push too hard, it just closes tighter and tighter, and then you can't be of any use when the time comes. So I hope that's helpful to her. And man, I'll be thinking about April's friend. I hope she finds recovery.
Yeah. By the way, Eric, I think that's totally the title of this podcast. The door to the soul opens inward.
I think I'm going to go with, I like the lucid interval as well. I think that's...
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, God. See, this is what we need. We need our sage predecessors to give us these little golden nuggets from time to time. All right. So April, I kind of want to answer this two ways. I'm gonna answer it from like her friend in active addiction and in recovery. So anybody who's listening out there who has a friend or a loved one in active addiction, the biggest thing is like Kenny said, like you can't push them. You can't really tell them they're an addict, they're a junkie, they're an alcoholic, just like Kenny said earlier in his share. Because that it doesn't do anything. Like you'll almost get a push back. You'll get the negative response to that. The biggest thing is like, and I know it's tough for friends and family of active addicts because we do terrible things. We're not particularly being the best versions of ourselves. We hurt people, we steal from people, we commit crimes, we do those things. So like there's a fine line of tolerance, acceptance, and then enabling. So like you have to look at your own behavior, make sure you're not enabling this person, but you have to come from a place of loving and understanding and compassion and that's the best avenue you have towards helping them find their path. Now, for somebody who's in recovery, so to anybody who's listening, friends and loved ones of someone who's already in recovery, basically, again, like look at what you're doing. Are you drinking around them? Are you smoking around them? Are you sort of triggering them? So try to eliminate those sort of things in the immediate environment around them, and just every once in a while give them some positive feedback. Be like, hey, I'm really proud of what you're doing. If you see those changes, like just say something. Just be like, hey, I really noticed like you're really getting your things together, and like I'm proud of you. Da da da. And again, compassion, support, love. If go to a meeting with them, go check out a meeting. If it's your best friend and they're going to a meeting, go to a meeting with them. Offer that to them. Say, hey, can I go with them? Like, even if you're not seeking recovery, go with them so they know that you're an ally. You're in this fight with them, and that they know they can count on you. And even if they don't totally understand why you're doing it, just be there. Show up for them just like they're showing up for their own recovery. Because even if it's not an addict working with another addict, it's another human being with another human being, and that's how we grow.
So when I was in active addiction, I had a lot of friends who I guess were addicts, but I also had a lot of friends who weren't addicts. And I guess, and I guess I'll take this back, like, from just personal experience. And one relationship I was in before I gave recovery a real try, the first time, we were together for 5 years, and she was not an addict. She used drugs, but I would not consider her an addict. But she was, she tried to support me. She tried to encourage me. But everything she did wasn't right, I guess. And possibly that could have been because I wasn't willing to hear it. Right. Like, I don't think her intentions were wrong. I think it was the way people were. Sometimes it's one thing that I like to tell people is you can say a lot more by listening sometimes.
Yes.
Because, sometimes people just need to know that they're heard. And if you're telling someone that, oh man, look at what you did. You got arrested again. Like, but it's like, yeah, they know that. Like they know, like, you don't need to you don't need to take their inventory. And honestly, the best way to be there for someone is to be there for them. Don't talk at them.
Yes.
Don't, even encouraging them, like that. Encouraging them is kind of a double-edged sword. Because if someone's not willing to hear a certain level of encouragement, they might take that as a slight. And I know that probably sounds crazy. Because it's like, well, I'm trying to help, and it's like, well, you got to know when to help. Like, how receptive are they going to be at that moment in time? Is this the right time to bring this up? Being in recovery, I have, I've dealt with a lot of people who are addicts or who have different mental health issues. And a lot of people in my life, will ask, oh, can you help this person? And my answer always is, I'm not going to be able to do anything unless they're at a point where they want to help themselves. Until that moment comes, the only thing I can do is be there and, show that I care. But I don't want to open the gate to saying something unless I know that they're willing to receive it. Because if I say it at the wrong time, and they're not ready to hear it, that could be the words that, prevent them from ever coming in.
Yeah. Well said. I thought that was 3 very different takes on the question. I think we answered it, all 3 of us, in a very well-rounded but pointed manner. Good job. A+ for everyone.
We're a good trio, you guys. That was good.
Yeah. All right, Kenny. Well, we're coming to the end here, but we want to give you one last quick minute to talk directly to the listeners, whoever's struggling, looking to find that message of hope. What do you have to say to them?
Yeah, I hope this has been encouraging to you. I hope that that this has been helpful, and my words of encouragement are, make sure even in these tough times there's so many meetings online and these Zoom meetings, and everybody's getting together, to just, the basics are still there, like to get to meetings and find a sponsor, find somebody that's got what you want and is willing to meet with you on a regular basis and is willing to take you through the steps. That's just so important that you've got somebody in your life like that. And then the accountable part, if you've got some secrets, some lurking notion that somehow you can stay sober and keep some certain secrets, or, and people have all kinds of stuff like that just destroys them, these things that get in their heads that, I took some painkillers when I broke my leg and I don't know. And, they don't talk to anybody about these kinds of things. And so there's my last minute, plea or preaching, whatever you'd like to call it, to the new women and the new men that are listening. And thank you guys again for having me on your podcast.
Of course.
Absolutely, man. And go ahead.
Oh, and Kenny, where can our listeners find you? I know you have a book and you have other things that you're doing. Where can they find your book and anything else that you are doing around the internet?
Yeah, I do a lot of writing, and it's not all on recovery, but it's all based, I've got a book that's about recovery and Awaken Giant Sleeping Spirit. I appreciate you asking that question. That book can be found on Amazon. And you can also go to my webpage, which is newthoughtlife.org, or you can find me at New Thought Life at Twitter. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook, so you should be able to find me pretty easy. But newthoughtlife.org is my author's webpage, and you'll be able to see the book and other things that I've written. And I'm just coming up on finishing my next book, which isn't on recovery, but it certainly is about the spiritual life. And I think it's going to really hit home, especially for addicts and alcoholics and people suffering from our disease.
Awesome.
All right, man. Well, we would like to thank Kenny for joining us this evening.
Woo! Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
I'm feeling the snaps tonight.
Good, man. Well, it's been great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Here at Podcast Recovery, we are aiming to expand the scope of support for recovering addicts. Accessibility and convenience of helpful services is paramount to combating addiction. We work to bring the message of recovery to every addict, wherever and whenever it is needed. We believe that a powerful voice of recovery should be obtainable, practical, and at the touch of a button. Every addict deserves to hear a message of hope, and Podcast Recovery is here to provide it. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Check out our website, podcastrecovery.com, and absolutely go to Kenny's website, newthoughtlife.org. But most importantly, everybody out there, stay safe and stay clean.